Get ready for a great show.
Black space is a place for us.
Real people with real issues.
Discussing real topics.
Black space.
A safe space for our community.
Hello, I'm George Middleton, your host this evening
Hi.
on this podcast episode of Black Space Live. The topic and title of our show today is Part 6, Who Hurt You? A conversation about relationship trauma with a special focus tonight on bridging the gap between the Black male and Black woman. I'd like to take this time briefly to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. In other words, don't be selfish with this content. Share the love. Now we have a star-studded panelist this evening. She said hi earlier because she's ready to go. And so we're going to take a quick moment to let our panelists just share with the audience anything that you would like them to know about you. Welcome, Doc Locks.
Hello, how are you tonight?
I am doing well. As I mentioned before we came on, I haven't seen you since last year.
Right. Happy New Year. Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes.
Happy
Yes.
spring. Yes.
Share with the listener and viewers just a little bit about you, even though you need no introduction.
Well, this is where I struggle. I am Shabella Wilson, have a PhD in leadership, have a long history in working in education, but I don't think people really know that I also am a certified life coach. And my area of specialty is relationships. But more so, I'm at the end of the relationship. So how do we divorce and move on amicably? And teaching people how to leave their relationship and their foundations that they built that they feel have crumbled. So that's a little bit of what I do.
That does take a skill set, doesn't it?
And a lot of drinks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is perfect then. So hopefully this will be a brief discussion, but a power-packed discussion, I'm sure. The focus for tonight is bridging the gap between the Black man and the Black woman. So before I have three areas that I want to explore this topic in. But before I do that, let me just ask you, do you feel that there is a bridge between the quote unquote Black male and the Black female as it pertains to a relationship or on any level?
Yes, but I also think it's generational.
Okay. Describe that gap, the nature of that gap.
Okay, so I think Gen Xers date and approach lifetime relationships very differently than the other groups of people, right? I think we are more abrupt and direct in what we are seeking. And, if it's a date, then it's a date. Generally, Gen X men are not going Dutch, right? And actually, I had a conversation with a man recently. He asked me out and he said, I see you have your PhD. I see you do this. I see you do that. So when we go out, would you mind going Dutch with me?
Interesting.
And I was like, absolutely not, because I have male friends who have no interest in me at all except to be my friend, and we are lifetime friends, who will take me out to dinner, who will buy dinner and drinks for me for no reason.
Mhm.
And you want to explore something with me, but you're telling me it's not worth $20, if that, for you to spend. So I think that's more so the divide of, we're gonna go Dutch, or I'm not spending money to get to know you, more so than anything else.
So on a more than random occurrence, you'll run into situations where men who have expressed a romantic interest in you will
Hmm.
actually verbalize their desire to
Hmm.
go Dutch, to go Dutch, and even justify it by saying, "Well, you're so high up on your level of accomplishment that it's appropriate." That's interesting.
Well, okay, I didn't think of it like that because he was a PhD as well.
Mhm.
And he said that he was doing it to protect himself. And because he made so much money and had so much clout in his field, he couldn't waste his money on people who were like gold diggers and, just trying to be with him because, mhm. So,
That's that.
yeah.
Now that is definitely a bridge. That's definitely a gap.
Yeah, and I didn't try to bridge that gap either, but
Yeah.
I was like, go
Mhm.
ahead, go find somebody else. I'm cool with that. So yes, I
Mhm.
do think there is a divide. I
Mhm.
also think there is a way to get back to each other. Um, I'm not a fatalist. I do believe that we, as a community, um, believe in love, and we believe in relationships, and we believe in building, and that takes both of us working together. So at our core, that's who we are, and I think at some point we're going to get back to that.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Um, well, I've got these three areas that I want to pursue it in, but the conversation, of course, does not have to be chained to that.
Okay.
Typically, I try to be more of a facilitator and maintain an air of objectivity, but I may stretch myself a little bit and take more of a um, uh, subjective male perspective just to try to make the conversation a little more representative of the male view since we don't have any other men here this evening.
Okay.
So the first category to have this discussion in is bridging the gap between man and woman requires, well, it implies femininity and masculinity. And as a therapist, and even in your work as a relationship life coach, um, from a cultural perspective, in the African American community, on a generational level, the male has been emasculated on a systemic level, on a societal level. He is last in every quality of life category, regardless of his socioeconomic status. He has to assimilate the most. He has to be aware of the environment at all times for his own survival and own success. So like this gentleman that we talked about who's up the ladder on the PhD level, there's a lot of men in our community who are highly successful, however, have to downplay their masculinity because the image of the black male tends to be perceived in a corporate organized work environment and in society at large as aggressive, intimidating, arrogant. So in many ways, the the African man's natural proclivities, his natural inclinations to survive in this Eurocentric based environment has to be emasculated. Now, if we're talking about bridging that gap, I would say between the man and the woman, I would say that the woman's femininity has the power to bring the masculinity back, to put our man back in his rightful place. Because the Black woman is also acclimated to seeing the men in their community placed on a lower level. Historically speaking, mothers prefer safety for their sons rather than their sons to be dominant in whatever capacity, because it's dangerous for their Black sons to be perceived in any type of dominant or aggressive manner. So over the generations, and this is not opinion, this is historical research that I'm referring from. Survival dictates that the mother teach the son to live safely, not be who he would naturally be. So I lay that context out there. Tell me what you think of that theory, Doc Locks.
I think a lot of things, and I see it from a lot of different perspectives. So I think the workforce is changing to appreciate a more effeminate man across the board, without regard to the man being Black or white or Hispanic or whatever. I think the term toxic masculinity has taken root in our society and has been placed upon all men. I think that when you talked about women seeing their men or Black men emasculated, or that Black men have to assimilate the most, I question that, because Black women also have to do a fair amount of assimilating to make it in corporate America as well. That's why we have perms, and that's why we dress a certain way, and that's why we talk a certain way at work.
Why would you question? Why would you question that if you readily see that
because
Black women have to assimilate? Then why would that be in question for the Black men have to assimilate?
You said Black men assimilate the most or more than, and I think it's at the same rate.
No. Let me clarify on it.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the Black male is the lowest. He's being assaulted the most. He's lower on every quality of life level compared to any other category, to include the Black female. Not that he has to assimilate the most. I never made a percentage quality on the level of assimilation, but what I'm saying is he is lowest on the hierarchy.
I don't know.
Disagree?
Yes, I'm in the middle on this one, well, on that statement, because I work with a lot of men who are not Black or white. They are Indian and Arabic, and they feel like they are lower than. So it's just interesting in that, because they have to give up so much to come into the American workspace. Traditionally and historically, I think you are correct. But now, slowly, in certain spaces, Black men are welcome.
That's just not true.
Okay.
Statistically speaking, I mean, and again, I never speak from personal opinion. So when I and just to give you a little more context, my focus in my therapeutic work is addressing the connection between our mental health and race ideology. Right. So I'm referring to a lot of the research that I do in that area, and the interventions that I've developed in addressing that. So I'm using very evidence-based uh, statistics in feeling that. So I understand that people may feel a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and I honor people's feelings, but when it comes down to the statistical fact, um, the feeling from any other culture group that they may have suffered as much as the African male statistically is just not supported.
Okay. So what I am saying is I work in higher ed and in K-12 education.
Hmm.
And in those bodies, we search high and low for Black men.
Right.
Okay.
Hmm.
So when I say some areas and in the technology field, they are searching high and low for Black men.
Right.
Um, so those are just two areas that I'm familiar with, right?
Hmm.
But I do think overall, when we look at the aspect of America, yes, Black men are dogged, they are portrayed negatively. But as a mother of a Black son, um,
Hmm.
when you talked about safety, I don't know how to process that because we have to teach safety. And I have another friend who has like 4 or 5 boys, and we've taught safety, but not at the cost of who you are, right? And my son plays football. He played lacrosse, and those are very aggressive sports. And I told him, and I've taught him that on the football field is where we let out our aggression, and on the lacrosse field is where we let out our aggression. Okay. Now, when we are in public, there's a certain way we maneuver and move because you are 6'4" and 300 pounds. Right. So, and we had to have this conversation when he was like 12 because he was really tall then. And I said,
Hmm.
so when people see you because you're 6'1" and you're 12, they don't see a 12-year-old, they see a man, and they don't look long enough at you to determine if you are 12 or a man. So, how you react and respond to things will determine the outcome. And then other things started to happen, and he was like, it doesn't matter how I behave or present. If they're going to kill me, they're going to kill me. Right. So, we've had those conversations. But when he was 12, 13, I did prefer safety. And I would say this, at home is the place where you are safe, where you can act out. And in certain areas, you can, be your whole self. But um, like when you're with your friends, you shouldn't have to put on a different face. You shouldn't have to hide who or what you are. And that's
Hmm.
kind of what I've taught. And because I'm just starting to talk to other mothers about raising their sons and how
Hmm.
that is done in a way that is affirming, safe, and rewarding for both the mother and the child.
So y- you may not realize it, but you're reaffirming the premise of what I'm saying.
About safe.
Being yes about safety,
Hmm.
because everything you just said, I totally agree with, and
Hmm.
actually, we're saying the same thing. You're reaffirming my premise. Um, the the field of the athlete, of course, is the appropriate place for the African American athlete to show his aggression.
Hmm.
But in the other social areas of life, it is not. There's a plethora of research that shows that the black boy is perceived more adult than his
Hmm.
white age counterpart. For
Yes.
the same behaviors, it is the perception of the black boy.
Hmm.
So as a result, because of that perception, he gets harsher
Hmm.
responses, consequences, penalties for the
Hmm.
same behaviors.
Yes.
So
I've
so
had teachers
yeah.
call
Mhm.
me about
Mhm.
my son sitting in a classroom tapping his pencil. And I've been a teacher, and I have also had to explain to teachers why that's inappropriate. So yes to all of that. But as parents, our job is to prepare our children for the adult world, right? And we have to teach them how to operate in safety and be their true selves. And so, as far back as Booker T. Washington, they talk about the double consciousness of the Negro. Okay. And people have gone on to talk about the triple quandary of the Negro and how we have to, and this is not just men, this is women as well, how we have to change ourselves to fit into these white or these non-African establishments and environments, right? So as a
Correct.
parent, knowing this and having experienced it, it would be wrong for me to not prepare my child for it.
Yeah, and totally agree. But I think the preparation thus far has emasculated, and I'm not going to say I think it's basically factual that the survival methods used by the women in our community unintentionally and made for good reasons and justifiable reasons have emasculated our men. And
Can you give me an example?
sure. I mean, and I'm speaking from personal experience as well as objective, because I've lived this. I live it. I can tell you in personal experience that I don't have enough fingers and toes for the times that I have suffered career-wise for offending a white female in the course of my work, in the course of doing my job. And all of this is very subjective. So a person can make it seem as something that it's not. But the pattern was, and I had to learn, first I had to recognize the pattern, and then I had to learn how to counteract it. But it took me several times before I was able to do that, because it was so personal. You're doing it in the course of your work, and boom, Heather is offended.
Okay. So
it's happened too many times for it to be
right.
a random occurrence.
Okay. And I'm not disagreeing, but
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken, you said that Black women emasculate their men. Heather, in your example, is white. So what we have to explain to our men and our children is white women play the game, and they start the game and they get loose and free. And then all of a sudden they change, but they don't tell you that they're changing. They just go to HR and you end up how you ended up.
Right.
But when dealing with Black women usually say, you know what, George, too far. Okay, let's not do that again. And I've been in situations where people have said things that are highly offensive, but I'm not going to HR because they Black, right? I'm not going to put anybody in that situation because I know the outcome. So I tried not to do that unless it's blatant. Like, I can't even imagine what it is. Like, if they touched me inappropriately, then if I couldn't get them together, then I would go to HR. But I don't see, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I don't see Black women emasculating men in that way. What I see, if we're calling this emasculation, is how Black women convey their feelings to Black men. The talking down to them, like when we're angry, and in my own personal relationships, if I'm angry, I always say, you know what, it's probably best I don't speak right now. And even today, when I sent somebody an email, I was like, because I value our relationship, I'm going to stop right here. And if you want to talk about this later, we can. Because words are hurtful and we never forget how those words make us feel. Even if there's an apology, we never forget that feeling. So I tell people when they're angry, to just shut up, don't talk, right? Walk away, do something else. Because in anger, I will say some things that are hurtful and we can't take words back once we've unleashed them upon someone and they hurt longer, the residue never goes away. Okay. So I think that's part of the divide. So I think if both parties learn to communicate or resolve conflict in a way that is positive, because all arguments and all fights don't have to be negative, right? I don't have to talk about your mama every time we're in an argument, and I don't have to, throw insults. I could just say, you know what, I'm really upset right now. I'm mad because, and list the reasons I'm mad and say right now is not a good time, or it made me feel a certain way, and go on. But that's not how people choose to communicate when they're angry.
So this discussion, I think, is a perfect example of the dynamic that the Black man and woman in our community are facing as it pertains to this topic. I know that you mean well. I know that you're being very sincere and authentic in your assessment of the state of our relationship on a collective level. And at the same time, I see that you are showing an inability to really embrace the male perspective that I'm sharing with you. And
how am I
it's
not embracing it?
Well, you're not internalizing. You have an explanation for how it is, and your responses, which is typically what most women in our community do, because they're trying to fix this and move on. So just do this and you'll be okay. And that has worked for our survival up to this point. But the way that you're looking at it, not just yourself, collectively, most women in our community look at it the same way that you're looking at it, contributes to this gap between the experience of the Black male and the experience of the Black female. And so when the male asserts himself and says, hey, you know what, this is the deal, there's a natural tendency for his woman in his community to try to pull him back, to try to redirect him, rather than to have his back and be there in support of his assessment of his inclination.
How have I not had his back when I have agreed with you on almost everything? And not once have I said, if you do this, then that. What I have described is what I told a 13-year-old growing into himself. There was no follow-up on how I addressed him as a 17-year-old. And when I talked about the woman being disrespectful to the man. So how is that?
So let me make sure. Maybe I'm hearing you incorrectly. Then
okay.
Let me just go back and do some review questions. I'm saying the Black male is regularly emasculated in almost every aspect of society. Do you agree or disagree?
And I agreed once you clarified.
Okay, got you. Okay, so we're clear on that. Mm-hmm. In the situation where you asked me to give you an example of such an emasculation, you do agree that the average experience I share with you personally occurs in Black men in most occupational, professional scenarios, correct? That's something that many Black men have to deal with, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But I also countered with how the white woman lures them in and said that I don't see Black women doing that. But I also said that doesn't mean it's not happening. Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay.
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 All right. Okay. So the premise, this first category of the discussion, is saying that masculinity. I'm proffering that masculinity gets a recharge from femininity, and so applying that in our community, when the Black male feels an authentic support for his natural inclinations, regardless of who it may offend, who it might insult outside of our community. That's the first step. That's the first step to bridging that gap.
So this sounds like, and I think this is the problem. It sounds like the Black man on this show, is asking me, the Black woman on this show, to ride or die for him, right or wrong. And
Interesting. Right or wrong, right or die, right or wrong.
that because behavior, and I don't think this is emasculation, because children are taught how to behave and where to behave, right? And that goes with us throughout our lives. How I act at church is not the same way I'm going to act at the club. Okay. How I behave at work is not the same way I'm going to act at home. So if my Black brother is at work acting like the club or giving club behaviorisms, then I would take it upon myself to pull him to the side and say, hey, this is not that environment. But I also have to protect me in that. So the feminine energy is to go talk to him and say, hey, these behaviors you're exhibiting are not professional for this environment. Now, if you want to go out after 5 and do this, that's fine. And then in that, like, it's okay everywhere else, that's affirming, right? But right here, it's not. So in that feminine energy, it just depends on how he takes it. So if he is of one belief, he's going to think that I am working for the man, or that I am coming to him and I'm killing his vibe and I'm not letting him be himself. But if I am a person who has been in the organization and I understand organizational culture, and I know that this behavior will ultimately get him fired because Susie over there or Heather are going to be offended at some point, then I'm giving him a lifeline. And I'm not trying to emasculate him. I'm trying to help him. Yeah. So what do you think about that? Because there are certain ways things are conveyed and how they're taken.
Well, I'm 100% in agreement with you. If that is the scenario, unprofessional behavior is unprofessional behavior. However, my scenario has got nothing to do with unprofessional behavior. My scenario has to do with professional behavior being perceived in a racial lens, which ultimately that's what we're speaking of. When we talk Black and white, we're talking race. So in a racial lens, the Black male is perceived as the most intimidating, the most aggressive, and will be met with harsher responses and harsher perception.
But I think Black women get those same labels. Though I know Black women get those same labels.
And that response right there. So let's make sure that we're on the same page there. You do agree that Black men do receive harsher perception and harsher consequences on average not just for
Partial
unprofessional,
perception.
not for unprofessional behavior, just in the regular occurrences of trying to go about their business. You're saying you agree or you disagree with that?
I agree that they get harsher scrutiny. I'm not sure about the outcomes or the consequences because I
Okay.
have not studied it. I have
Okay.
no literature on it.
Got you.
So if we're doing this from data, I have no idea. If we're doing this from what I see,
Right.
I think we're running neck and neck.
Okay. I got you.
Um,
I got you. And again, this is what I'm saying is that's that perception, and that's an honest perception of yours that are shared by a lot of women in our community. And the purpose, when I'm doing these shows, the purpose is to make this a very factual base. I mean, make it entertaining. I don't want it to be boring and all that kind of stuff, but also to make it grounded in fact, because
theory and facts.
yes. And so, whoever's watching this, they can go back and do some research and they'll see that 9 times out of 10, the information I'm giving can be supported in general. If they just do any research, they'll find that the statistics are supporting what I'm saying. So what, your response really brings out that disconnect. And that is a significant gap, because for the Black male, coming from a Black male perspective, what that's saying to me is that no one understands me, not even the woman in my community, even though she loves me, even though she loves me. Yeah, even though she loves me, even though she is concerned for my safety, she really does not understand my plight.
I think it's how it is conveyed. And what I mean by that, so like if we were off the air and if you and I were friends or lovers and you came home to me and said this and gave me all the details of what happened, my
You just
response.
You just took me on a whole nother path there, Doc. Why
No,
did you
because
do
you're
that?
talking about the feminine energy, but so there are levels of feminine energy. But if you came home to me and we had this conversation, it would be a much different response. So I think how I would respond to the man I love and the man in my life, my friend, like my homie, my friend, and how we talk about that and how I understand how he's feeling in that moment, then we can talk about
Interesting.
the woman not understanding. So if my response is, dude, we all going through it, you're not the only one, there is a disconnect. However, if it is the different and I sit and I listen and I comfort him in a way that is meaningful to him, then he knows and he feels affirmed and that someone does understand him. So I think it's all in the response. So at work, while I might be a little more non-traditional and we'll say, for lack of a better word, approachable and soft with the average Black man, at home with my real Black man or the man that is real for me, it's a very different response. So at work, because of the work politics, sometimes the Black woman can't bring her feminine energy in that space and can't show understanding openly to him. Now, if both of them are aware, a look will convey a whole lot. Okay? Because women do it with each other. And you can tell with women in those tight moments who's in your corner and who's not, just by a look. Right? So that's what I think, that's where the divide is in how we are approaching this.
Well, I appreciate that nuance, and I think you made that has some merit. I think we're going to need to explore that more. And yeah, I really do. I mean, because I think that's a totally plausible contextual consideration in this conversation. And you also mentioned that there may be outside of that context
Hmm.
barriers preventing the black female from expressing that support to the black male in
Hmm.
particular context. So yeah, I think we should definitely explore that more. What I want to do is uh, give a we had a show based on typical based on cl- associated with this topic, and I wanted to bring it back because it was opened up with Tashina Arnold of
Hmm.
Martin, and I want to read just a little piece off of this, and then go to one more section because I know we're coming close on our time. But
Okay.
the article is Tashina Arnold sparks debate on Twitter after posing question about the emasculation of black men. And she asked the question, honest question, what can we as black women in America do to stop aiding in the emasculation of black men in America? The she goes on further to say, our sisters can understand that we are each other's natural counterparts, and there is a clear agenda at work to keep us separate, and black men specifically a weak and permanent underclass. Um, let's see what else is written here. Uh, the article states to reject feminism, reject the superiority complex the dominant society teaches you to have. Um, so Tashina really angered a lot of women in our community with that statement. When she makes that statement, how does that hit you?
It doesn't. So when I hear things, I think about who's saying it, why they're saying it, and their ideology.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll stop there. And knowing some of those things about her, I want to know why she said it. Like, what was the purpose of the article, right? That's
Okay.
what I want to know.
Mhm.
So the nerd in me is like, can you send that to me, please?
Yes,
So I
I
can
will
read
send
it.
it to you. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll put that in our chat. So
Um,
yeah, so we're gonna have to come back and delve into this because
mhm.
first of all, I really appreciated um, the thoughtful perspective that you're giving this conversation, and it's important for people to see this play out.
Mhm.
They're seeing your perspective, which I think represents a lot of women in our community. So you're not like going against the beaten path, going against the grain. It represents where you are. I'm giving you a position of where I am. And even though we're in alignment on certain things, there's definitely some space there
Mhm.
that we have to negotiate.
But did you think, or do you think, because you've seen me in other podcasts,
Hmm.
when you knew the topic, did you think that we would be in total alignment? And is the goal for Black men and women to be in total alignment or just to be in 75 to 80% alignment?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Um, I think people in our profession, like what you do and what I do, I think we both know that's not it's not a desirable goal, nor is it reality.
Right.
To That's just not, and that's never my goal in these conversations. Um, and often, I'm looking for just the content,
Mm-hmm.
the objective rationale,
Mm-hmm.
and I can respect a person's ideological perspective or narrative either way, whether I agree or disagree, uh, because I'm looking for forward movement, and forward movement requires that all of us are going to have to, we all have something to bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And for us to move forward, we're also all going to have to be willing to give up a few things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, that is a mature, productive discussion. So I like, now, sometimes my way irritates my producer of this show, because he kind of likes to see fists flying and stuff like that. And, and I like that too.
But not
But,
every episode and not all the
yeah,
time.
yeah, and it's time for the general public to raise its. We are smarter than the average fifth grader. Let's raise our intellectual level. Intellect can be exciting too.
It can be.
And the things you're saying are shared by so many people, so it has to be out there so that we can really, break this thing down. So here's the second area that we obviously we won't go long, but I want to at least tease it for the next part
Okay.
7.
Okay.
So and this is going to be, I think this premise is going to be really challenging to the average Black woman, to bring out the servant in the man. Submission must be embraced by the woman. Now, when you hear that premise, tell me how that hits you.
So the first time I heard it, when you said it off air, it did not make me feel good. That's what I'll say. I don't know if we cuss on this show, but that's what I was doing in my head, right? Like internally.
There you go.
Okay. And I was saying,
what were you saying in here? What were you say it best you can? What were you saying in your head?
N-word, please. Multisyllabic profanity. You have lost your mind.
Okay.
But but then you said it a second time, and I was like, maybe. And now the third time that you said it, so I think about the men in my family who are all servants. And I don't think it's because of the women they married. I think it's because of how they were raised. Okay. So my dad was raised to serve the family, whatever that looks like. And what I've always said about my parents is the reason their marriage has lasted 50 plus years is they serve each other. And even when they're angry, nothing stops, right? So I'll never forget when I was little, my mom and dad had an argument. And I never heard the argument, but I could just tell the friction, right? So they had 2 cars. My mom's car broke down. And I'll never forget, my dad was like, come on, we got to go get your mama. So we go. They don't speak, right? She gets in the car. He looks at her and she says, I'm okay. And we drove back home. She cooked, he ate, and nothing stopped, right? Nothing in the house stopped because they had a disagreement. So again, I think it's how we, and when I say we, Black women, affirm and create the environment of the home. Okay. And I think sometimes that is missed. So I think servitude is how we're raised, right? And it comes out because we're loved.
So great personal experience. However, collectively, that's just not a shared dynamic. What you're saying, as idyllic as that sounds, and I'm happy for you that you have that experience in your development. But statistically speaking, it just ain't so. It ain't happening.
I don't know. Most of my friends are married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're coming from your perspective. Your own experiential perspective, which
right,
on an individual level is true for you.
Right. And that's what I always say. It's true for me. That does not mean it's true for everyone.
Exactly.
I am not an all or nothing. I have also taught for several years, or did teach for several years, and I saw a lot of things. So I know a lot of people aren't married, and I am divorced. So I know a lot of people are divorced.
Mhm.
So I know those things happen.
Yeah.
I also know, well, here's what I'll say about marriage. And this is what I don't think people take into account. Marriage, from what I have seen,
Mhm.
serves the man more than it does the woman.
Statistically speaking, you are correct.
Uh-huh. So men, once divorced and realize that they have to do all these things that their wives used to do,
Mhm.
seek to remarry for whatever reason, um, and just kind of live through it.
Mhm.
Whereas women, once divorced, either remarry for real true love or real true money.
Mhm. Right.
So, and I don't know
So,
if that goes against what you're saying or if
no,
it
no,
provides context to it,
it
but I
definitely
think
does.
it's rooted in love. And when we genuinely love someone, and that's what I was thinking. I have a 90-minute commute. So I was thinking, like, if we woke up every day in love and said, how can I serve my mate today? There would be much less divorce and conflict if we did that. Like if every man and woman who were married said that every day, imagine how wonderful their marriage would be.
Right. However,
If we said
however that
more. Go
I
ahead.
totally agree. I totally
Mhm.
agree. However, it takes whole and healthy persons in order to wake up and have that. And unfortunately, what you have in the majority, significant majority of our relationships are unhealthy and partial human beings.
Mhm.
There's a cliche where people would say 50-50 love. And the reality, it's really, you don't want no 50-50 love. You want 100%, 100%. We need
Right.
we need whole
Mhm.
beings.
Mhm.
The trigger word, and especially when it comes to this word submission,
Mhm.
because it serves as a trigger for someone who is not whole.
Mhm.
Particular article I'm going to read from comes from a more spiritual perspective. And
Okay.
again, I honor people's religious or spiritual proclivities either way. I've got my own, but that doesn't mean mine's the only way. Women and men, this section of the article says women and men have equal worth.
Mhm.
Submission can be a hot button term because of how it's perceived in
Mhm.
contemporary culture. The implication that women are inferior to men. The particular scripture it's referring to is Ephesians 5:15-33. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Husband, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave
Mhm.
himself up for her. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So, based on one's own emotional state, uh, where they are in their own development, they're going to perceive or interpret the scripture accordingly. And the general state of society is typically
Mhm.
this is perceived negatively, as you stated earlier with what your inside voice when I first mentioned this.
So because so I come from a very religious and churchy background.
Hmm.
And submission was always taught as something women did to and for men.
Right.
And it was presented as the man has absolute power, right? Um, and who wants that? No
Hmm.
one, no woman. Um, like we didn't have a voice, and we didn't have any say so in this home that we've helped create. So submission in that context and how it was presented is not sexy. It is not something, especially in this generation of women who have grown up, um, you have college degrees, we have our own cars, we might have lived alone before we got married, and we've had all this autonomy. And then for somebody to say, oh, I need 75% of your check, or we're going to do it this way, and not take into account her expertise or her voice at all. But when we look at what submission really is, and that's us being that to each other, because the verse keeps, like Ephesians, the first part of it talks about wives obey your husbands, but then it goes on to say that we are to submit to each other. What does that look like?
Right.
And I don't think people spend enough time talking about how the house is going to operate. Okay, because marriage is cute. Like the getting married piece is cute, it's stressful a little bit. But the day-to-day work, it's like being on a factory line, and it's not sexy. It can be dull and boring because you're doing the same thing almost every day, because you have to have a system to make the house run. Even if it's an apartment, even if it's a shack, there has to be a system. And I don't think people pay enough attention to those pieces of the everyday. What does it look like when we come home? Like, does that mean she cooks every day? Or does that mean she got Tuesday and Thursday and he has Monday and Wednesday and we eat out on Friday? What does that look like? And those are important things. But I do think temperament and temperance are feed into submission.
All those things, your whole assessment is true. I would say it's very accurate. However, it's after the fact of something that I believe is more foundationally involved. And that being that for the typical Black woman, the average Black woman has a very low level of respect for the average Black man. And when I say that, I don't mean it in a mean way or in a critical way. I mean it in a factual way. We began with first addressing the emasculation of the Black male. So you can't, the average perception of the Black male in our community is not at its masculine best. So it's going to be hard for a female to say, I'm going to submit to this.
I think it's all in how it's presented.
But the point, I mean, yeah, the context matters, but on average, on a large level, because we're talking about the gap, and I think we're in agreement, maybe in percentages, but we're in agreement that there is a gap. This can definitely contribute to the gap, and I know in my work, I'm dealing with youth and families, mostly single mothers. Fathers are nowhere around. Mom's trying to hold it down. She's got two knucklehead boys and they're trying to be men. They don't know how to be men. She don't know what to do. They're tearing the house up when they get in the fight. She's trying to hold it down. They won't respect her law because they don't respect her, because there's no man around. And the man that is around.
Okay, let's talk about that scenario.
Okay.
So I have difficulty with them, with children not respecting their mother. I need to know what happened that they don't respect her, because I am not a tall woman by any stretch of the imagination. I don't weigh a whole lot either. But my 6'4", 300-pound son knows there are certain lines you don't cross, period. I will say that when I was in the early stages of my divorce, a friend of mine, a male friend of mine, called me and said, I know you won't do this, but I'm going to tell you, you have to be very careful raising a boy. Like, you can't have a lot of men around. You can't see men coming in and out of the house and in and out of your room, because he will lose respect for you. And he said, that's not who you are. He said, but sometimes women in divorce lose themselves and they want something so badly, they entertain a lot of the worst elements, right? And I was like, okay, I appreciate that. So I have always been very cognizant of who I date and how I date, which is very difficult for a lot of women because a lot of women feel like they're grown, they make the rules, and they deserve to be happy. And if that happiness is in another man, then they're going to date until they get it right. And I'm fine with that. But I don't think children need to see all of that. Okay. And that's the mistake mothers make. So I think that's why children, boy children, male children, don't respect their single mothers. I also feel like if the mother and the father aren't together and she is constantly talking bad about the father, that's an issue as well. So those are underlying factors that fuel things.
Those are behaviors that are subsets of the overall lack of respect that the average Black woman has for the average Black man. You're going to get those type of behaviors that you just described, which I agree with, and that does occur. But it's not only those behaviors. It displays itself based on where that person is in their stage of development or lack thereof. But the overall factor is the lack of just respect for what the male is in concept in the community.
Okay. So again, I can only.
You're coming from your perspective. You use the example of your son, and that does occur. But that again is not the statistical majority.
So I question these statistics because I know how to play with the data, and I know how to make it look away when it really isn't. I also know how to only investigate people that will give me certain responses. So my thinking about this data is educational attainment. Who are these women? Socioeconomic status, and things of that nature. Now, sometimes that matters and sometimes it doesn't. What I will say is in the people that I know who have been divorced, it's a 50-50 because some, like I said, have dated and dated and dated in front of their children. Others have been very covert in their dating and very respectful. I have tried,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have tried because I knew my son needed a man in his life or men in his life. I have a lot of male friends. So I introduced them very early to him. And I also still have a father who is very much a part of our lives because his dad lives several states away. So it was very intentional to put certain types of men in his life and in programs that affirm Black male behaviors and what is a Black man, So sometimes because of where we live and with whom we associate, we might not know that those things are available to us. And that's why we have young men who are disrespectful and unruly, because if all you see, and what we don't discuss is how we are portrayed in the media. So if all we see is gangs and the absent father and nobody gets out of our neighborhood and everybody's poor and struggling, then that's what we aspire to become because we don't know anything else or we don't see anything else. Right.
Well, that is all we see. And again, that goes to the larger overall picture of the lack of respect for the African male.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take the best of the circumstances in our community that you're describing, where people are being
Mm-hmm.
very conscientious about their behavior, they're trying to do things the right way. Just studying that group, you're still going to see a lack of respect for the Black male, even at that level of quality of individual, especially as it pertains to this word submission. If you just stay within your upper socioeconomic, high achieving Black population, you're still going to see those dysfunctional components that affect the quality of our relationship, that contribute to this gap. Because divorce is not a respecter of socioeconomic status.
No, it is
and
not.
and there and and there's a pattern, and in our work we're looking for patterns, and these patterns are too consistent for it to just be a random occurrence. So there's got
So
to
I
be
think,
an underlying factor. So again, just the mere mention of the word submission
mhm.
triggers the average successful, high achieving oriented Black female. It
Well,
does not, it does not give her a warm and fuzzy. It has to be mentally negotiated with, because there's a cognitive dissonance occurring. Who am I going to submit to? And why would I submit to him? And if I do decide to submit to him, he is going to have to be of such character. And I'm going to really, really analyze that behavior and hold him to the fire. And that is the reality. And that's contributing to our gap.
but I think you have taken out the lens, because a lot of people, like when we talk about submission, it is spoken of that we give up everything, all of our rights and our voice and our preferences to listen to him, when that is not what true submission is. So if we could get together on what submission is, because of how it's been portrayed to us,
Mhm.
um,
Well,
or
that's what
to,
let's see.
yeah,
That's what this conversation is for. And
okay.
I'm giving you the direct lead into. I think you're trying to acknowledge it without acknowledging it. It has to be, what has to be acknowledged right now for the average Black woman, regardless of socioeconomic status, is she does not have, on average, a healthy level of respect for the average Black male. She is more vulnerable to the negative associations for all of the justifiable reasons you stated earlier, all which are true. But that is her general level of perception about the man in her community. That's an issue that has to be acknowledged, identified, and reckoned with in order to close this gap.
So part of this feels like, um, in your Black masculinity stance, Black men are misaligned and misunderstood, and in that are taking no ownership in any of this. So because the
That,
Black
that
woman,
that's a serious implication there. I mean, you really, that you brought that implication in, and that's out of the blue. I mean, how would you associate
because all of this,
that we would take no ownership?
every time I have countered, you have portrayed me negatively.
That's not
And
true. Not
to
true.
me, I'm telling you how I feel and how my
Right.
perception. Okay.
hmm hmm
Um, and in
Give,
this, if Black men,
give me one solid way that I've portrayed you specifically negatively.
when you play this back, the first part of the conversation,
Which was what?
um, but listen, I'm not finished with my point.
Okay. All right.
So, in this portrayal of Black men not being respected, I think there are a lot of things that we are not taking into account. Um, if Black women don't respect Black men, why? Are there some behaviors that the Black man have exhibited? Like, what have pastors done? What have CEOs done? What have our Black leaders done in the past and currently that have put Black women in a space where they felt unprotected or made them feel um, that they've been undermined, right? So all of these perceptions aren't wrong. It's just like stereotypes. Some stereotypes are true, like a little piece of it is true. But are all Black men like disrespectful or any of that? No. But I think part of this conversation is looking at how we got to this point. So, yes, some of it is racism, some of it is a plan of action to keep the race down, because if they can keep us divided, then we are not procreating, we're not producing, it's a lot that's not getting done in our community. And then the other part of it is there are some Black men who have treated Black women very badly. Okay. And sadly, the hurt person, if they have the mic, gets the most attention. So if I am hurt and I have a podcast that reaches thousands, they're going to hear me talk about them in a negative way. And they're going to, and how does that manifest when I'm raising daughters? Or even if I'm raising sons, how do they see themselves? And how do my daughters begin to see Black men? So I think part of this conversation needs to be about how this divide happened, and then how do we bridge these gaps? Because some of this is written, or the questions are triggering for a reason, to get a response, which I understand. But I also feel like when we're talking about Black women, the conversation is always, how do we fix? How do we fix, right? What is she doing wrong? And then how do we fix? But we never talk about healing the Black man. We never talk about fixing the Black man.
But see, I think that's what we've been doing. I think, I'm representing the male perspective. You're representing the female perspective. And I think that the conversation has been organic in showing the reality of that gap, regardless of how you and I are in alignment or out of alignment. We're demonstrating the very gap that we're discussing, just from our perspectives. And then to address your perception that I'm implying no ownership. You can't own something that you don't recognize. So the first step in ownership and accountability is recognition of the issue. To not recognize it and to not call it as accurately as possible, as objectively accurate as possible, is lack of accountability, is lack of ownership, because your solution is going to be off base. And objective truth, I approach everything from a therapeutic angle. And I say that because as a therapist, I don't focus on morality. I don't focus on who's right. I don't focus on who's wrong. What I focus on is this working for us or is it working against us? And I try to have that objective conversation first. And then if you want to go back and place a moral template on it, a religious template on it, whatever ideological narrative you want to place on it, 9 times out of 10, because you've done the objective assessment, your ideological framework in most cases, align with the outcomes of that assessment. What we tend to do, we collectively, is
Mhm.
we assess from a moral framework, automatically making us do blame, point fingering, who's doing this right, who's doing this wrong. Not to say that there's no merit to it, but that is not the most effective template with which to
Right.
assess a problem. And so I can truly say, for everything that we've discussed, there's nothing you've said that I've disagreed with at all, because there's merit to your position. And in many cases, I've said this also. You may not realize it, but it's in alignment with my premise, which I think you have a more challenging time seeing because of the emotionality of some of the ways that I'm presenting this, dealing with submission, dealing with emasculation. These are very emotionally charged words. And so that may be where you're from, but
So
none of my
emasculation doesn't bother me. I always wonder, like as we've been talking, I wonder, my first was like, will the audience know what emasculation is? Because a lot of people think they know.
Right. Good point.
Um, so part of me wanted to ask you to define the term so we could go and have an understanding of the word, but I didn't. Submission, it just means a lot of different things to a lot of different
Right.
people.
Right.
And I really, like my friends and I talk about this a lot. I really believe because of at our age, how it was ingrained in us as children or as young adults, how women were supposed to just give up everything. So that's why it's like the initial response is, you know, all of, the face and um, what? Uh,
Did he say N word, please?
right. That was what? Um, and in submitting, it puts a lot of work on the woman in ways that I don't think most people think about. Um, and we see it played out on television. Uh, do you watch Accused? It's a new TV show. I think it comes on Fox on Tuesday nights.
No, not familiar with it.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, they ran a program, and every week it's a different. They have different characters every week, so it's never the same cast of characters. Okay, so it's a new problem every week. Actually, this was not on that show. This was on something else, but it was a real crime show. But this young lady, they were very religious. Her husband got sent to jail, so his friend came and said, "You can stay with me." Whatever. He ended up holding her and her children and his wife and kids hostage. And he, in their portrayal, kept saying, "You all must submit to me." Right? And in that was absolute submission. They had to ask him, could they talk? They had to ask him, could they go to the bathroom? He told them when they could shower. The kids didn't go to school. They had to teach the kids at home, and none of the women could go anywhere by themselves. So, because of how we were taught as children, or I was taught, when I think about submission, that's the image I see. As an adult who has experienced love and heartbreak and friendships, and I understand submission as something else.
Yes.
Okay. So the question then becomes, how many people really understand what it is and how it plays out in their relationships? And I don't think we have people who are healthy enough, and you might have said this,
Right.
to delve that deep into
Exactly.
what it looks like.
Exactly.
So I think then we should counter with, how do we make these people whole? And even asking this, I'm wondering if this is privilege talking, because I had this conversation with a gentleman 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about how women are broken and how women need to go get counseling and women this and women that. And I was like, you're talking from a point of privilege because we have benefits. So we can go, and we work 8 to 5. So it's easy to go see a counselor who, could see us at 1 o'clock on our lunch break, or could see us at 6 o'clock when we're off, or the fact that it could be free for us, depending on our insurance, or a $20 copay. But think about the woman who might not have our benefits, or might not have our jobs, or might not have the salaries that we have. How does she get help that she needs? Or how does he, the man in the same situation, get help that he needs?
Well, I think you're segueing into the close of this show based on a challenge that I want to present to your question. And just based off of how this conversation has gone today, which I think has been a very, really, for me, a personally enjoyable discussion. I think it's productive. I hope it was entertaining enough. I know sometimes we can get very cerebral, but this is important stuff we're talking about. And so, I really want to do the due diligence that it deserves. But I'm going to frame a challenge to the female on how to move the ball forward in bridging this gap. And I want you, after I give mine, I'm sure you're going to have a give back on that. Frame a challenge to the male. And we want to put that out there as a tease for part 7 of this discussion. Okay? So based on the discussion today, and to your question, how do we, since we're not healthy enough, how do we begin to move forward? Here's my advice for the women. Get out of your feelings. Learn to be objective and less emotional. Now this is the challenge. So don't get into it yet, because this is going to be for the next show. In other words, it ain't all about you, boo. That's my challenge to the women for part 7. You go.
I'm so what can I say? I think men need to, or be certain that their circle is affirming. And when I say affirming, I mean the men in their circle, or the people in their circle, hold them accountable in a way that is meaningful, and they're not just co-signing on their foolishness. Like, yes, that's what I'll say. That's my challenge for the men. Or just think about your friend circle and think about the people you talk to about your problems or about your relationships. And are they, or do you allow them to be honest enough to point out your shortcomings?
All right. So you're saying it kind of politically correct. So I want to pull a little bit more out of that statement, because I know I think I know what you're trying to say. Give me some adjective descriptions of the typical Black male circle that you see is detrimental to their progression.
Oh, no. So I don't know. I just know it exists. So I'll give you, remember A Different World? Mm-hmm. Okay. Remember, I think it was season 2, and Dwayne was on the baseball team. And the baseball player, the star baseball player, kept talking about his his engagements with women. And he kept saying things like, you have to make them feel like it's okay to say yes. The games that they play, they say no, but they mean yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dwayne went back to Walter and was like, is this, and had, used the same words. And Walter was like, no, don't do that because that's going to get you 25 to life. And I think too many times we have men whose friends, instead of saying, no, that's not right,
Right.
they'll co-sign on that.
Okay. Gotcha.
And they don't challenge them to be the bigger or the better person, and say, what if that was your sister? Or
Right.
how would you feel if somebody did that to your mother? Or that's just not how we treat people. So that's what I'm saying. Don't co-sign on their mess is the better way to put it. Challenge their behavior, their negative behavior patterns. Now sometimes foolishness is funny, but then when it starts to hurt other people, is it really? Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've planted the seeds for discussion. I think we put some meat on that bone to pick off for the next episode. Doc Locks, I've really enjoyed you.
Well, thank you. I enjoy being here. Yes.
Really enjoyed this. Was a great discussion. And I hope that we get you back on this, and then we get, I'm probably going to need to get a couple of other guys on you, because I think you're going to come with heavy artillery for the next one.
I really will not. I don't think so. I think I'll talk to you about it after.
And then we got to get a couple other different perspectives too, in addition to the male from my perspective and on your perspective. But I think this one-on-one was good. I think it was good. It was provided a lot of clarity. And then the gentleman you asked about earlier, hopefully we'll get him back, because I'm sure that's going to. Excuse me.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Yes. The great one and only Penny. Excuse me. You got me all choked up, Doc.
Not me.
Woo. Okay. So anyway, thank you all for hanging out. This has been great. We went longer than we planned on it. Have a great week. And until the next time we meet, we'll see you in the black space.